to this interview that we haven't touched upon?
Do I have anything?
I don't know.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology and Happy New Year. This video is an interview with Tawnya Renelle from Beyond Form Creative Writing, and she's going to talk to us about the workshops that she organizes with herself and other tutors, and her trajectory from doing a PhD in creative writing to launching a writing business. We will also talk about her poetry collection and listen to one of her poems. I hope you enjoy this interview, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, Tawnya.
Hi, how are you, Dan?
I'm fine. Yeah, thank you for coming to Poetology and agreeing to do this interview with me. I'm really excited to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. So I've watched your other interviews, and it feels like an honor to be part of the little group of people you've been able to interview. So
thank you so much. Yeah, and I've been to some of your online courses and they're amazing. So I'm also really excited to talk a bit more about that project and your writing in general.
Yay, thanks.
You're welcome. So first of all, can you talk a bit about your trajectory from your PhD in creative writing to launching Beyond Form Creative Writing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been quite a journey, I guess. So I'll try and think of the shorter version of the story. But essentially, I came over to the United Kingdom to do a PhD in creative writing at the University of Glasgow, which I can never stop saying enough good things about the University of Glasgow. I was really fortunate, and my supervisors gave me a lot of space to be able to merge creative and critical work. And so my dissertation project was to write a textbook or a workbook about hybrid and experimental forms that is written in hybrid and experimental forms. So I spent my years doing my PhD really invested in pedagogical theory and really trying to think through how best to teach experimental writing, how to encourage people to experiment within their creative practice. And I feel like my PhD was a lot of figuring that all out and testing out material. For that textbook, I actually crafted over 65 writing exercises, some that were inspired by other books, some that sort of just came out of my own practice or my head. And so, you know, I think I'm among many people who I finished my PhD in the middle of a pandemic. So I know I'm not the only one who had a major life event in the middle of a pandemic. So I sat my Viva in my living room by myself in my flat, finished my PhD, and it really Beyond Form Creative Writing started as a bit of a scramble, to be fair. It was a friend was doing an online fringe festival, asked me to teach one class, was like, hey, would you like to do a workshop? And I said, absolutely, that sounds fun. Did the one workshop and then got sort of a flood of emails of people saying, oh, you know, do you teach? I'll pay you. And it had was such a radical notion to me that I could get paid outside of the academic institution to teach creative writing. It was like this really sort of anomaly for me. I was like, oh, wait, people want me to teach and I'm not officially associated with anything. And so for a year, I just sort of taught workshops, taught 300 people, did mentoring. It just sort of continued to organically grow. And then because I am an immigrant, because I am an expat, when I wanted to stay in the United Kingdom, I really had to make some choices. And the visa that I'm currently on is for small businesses. So I had to take what I was sort of doing in a scramble on my own and make it into what could be constituted as a legitimate business in the eyes of the United Kingdom government. That doesn't sound very nice. I'm very happy to be running Beyond Form now. I'm very glad various channels pushed me to this, but it was at the beginning sort of just like a way to do something and a way to survive. And now it's become much more.
Yeah, that's amazing. Sometimes it comes out of necessity, but that's also what can give you the courage to do something that can seem really bold and intimidating, right? Because these projects, we're not really prepared for that in academia. So I think becoming an entrepreneur after your PhD is such a big move, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I tell people too to like be careful what you wish for. I mean, that's an old adage, I guess, but like I really had always thought that I was never going to be a traditional kind of academic. And I had, even doing my PhD, had some reservations about whether or not I really wanted to come out of the PhD and go straight into like a position at a university or an institution. and it had been things that I'd been working through, and it was sort of just basically like the universe was like, well, you're definitely not going to do that. like all those inclinations you had to be doing something alternative, now that's really what you're going to do. And you know, I think in ways the pandemic accelerated some things. While it slowed some things down, it really accelerated other things. And so this might have been a business I got to 2 or 3 years from now, but because of the nature of everyone being at home and the sort of access to education being online and Zoom and all these things, it sort of like put me right in the spot to be able to start this up. So.
So tell us a bit more about Beyond Forms. What is it? What is its mission? What vision do you have for it? What are the various projects that you're involved in?
Yeah, so Beyond Form, that title came from, actually, I have to give credit where credit's due, which is to Maria Sledmere, who's, you know, finishing her PhD at University of Glasgow. We were working together to do a symposium about experimental and hybrid forms, one of the many casualties to the pandemic. And that name, we were trying to think of a name that would really embody what we wanted the symposium to do, which was going to be sort of a like changing of the traditional ways that conferences are run. So Beyond Form sort of became this mantra for us that's really looking at work across mediums that pushes into this new space that really exists beyond form. So that's sort of where the name comes from. But now, you know, with Maria's permission, I was like, I really think I should take this on for my business because that's really what I want to do. So Beyond Form Creative Writing is really a hub that is giving us space to talk about experimental work, and it's really open. Its accessibility is at the core of what we do. And that's not just access like financially, but access to artists working across mediums, writers of all genres, and really wanting to have a way to do mentorship, courses, events, and long-term goal publishing that really focuses on experimental work, because there isn't necessarily, experimental work is becoming more and more something we're seeing happen. It's becoming a trend, it's becoming a fad, it's becoming really popularized, but there's not necessarily a place where you can turn 100% to do those things. And that's really what I wanted to create. So I feel like we're being successful so far. You know, I think that it's been really exciting this year. This is the first time I've had people come underneath the umbrella of Beyond Form and teach classes, so that it's not just me, because I really want to diversify what we're doing and what Beyond Form offers. I'm making sure there's people coming on who teach things that are totally out of my wheelhouse. So as you know, Declan Whiffen taught a course about nature. It's like, that's just not something I do personally. And we have some big projects coming. I guess this is probably a good place to talk about them. So we do Talking Beyond Form is a new free event where I'm interviewing authors or artists about their practice and projects. Last night, I actually interviewed Julietta Singh, who wrote No Archive Will Restore You. It was fantastic and really enlightening. And she was so eloquent and so full of such inspiration for everybody who was there. And in that moment, I was like, this is so much what I want Beyond Form to do, which is to just provide these opportunities and spaces where we can hear about process and practice and hear from people who are really writing alternative kind of books. But the other big thing is my textbook is being published this year. So the publishing side of Beyond Form is actually starting this year, a lot sooner than anticipated. But I have an investor who's paying for the book to be published. So Beyond Form Creative Writing is essentially not only going to be a place for courses and mentorship, but now is also going to have its own publishing house within the business. So
that's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. It's a lot of work. It's a big undertaking.
Yes.
But I mean, it's the big goal is really to like have the textbook make enough money so that we can put out an anthology. Because really in the last few years, I've worked with such incredible authors and writers and artists. And I just really want to be able to like put out an anthology that showcases all of the incredible work I've heard and seen. And so that's kind of the hope.
I'm also curious, since we are both poets, to know how you integrate poetry within a more experimental, multi-genre form of writing and in the courses that you give, as well as in your own writing.
Yeah, that's it. It's a good question. Because I was thinking about it, I read your questions ahead of time, and there was a while there where I was like really adamantly would only call myself a poet. like, I was like, I'm a poet. Like, no matter what I'm writing, I'm a poet. And then sometimes my bio says that like Tawnya Renelle is a poet first and foremost. So it's really, poetry is at the core, at least for my creative practice, is at the core of everything I do. It doesn't matter if I'm writing in prose or I'm writing in more poetic forms. Like, I feel like the economy of language and my desire to communicate in moments and to encapsulate that is really what a poet does. So I'm really pushing for that in my writing, no matter what it might end up looking like in the final product. And then I think for the workshops, I encourage, as you know, because you've been to the workshops, I really encourage people to express in whatever mode they need. And if that means that sometimes you come out of a workshop and you've written a bunch of poetry, or sometimes you come out and you've written a bunch of prose, it's really listening to yourself and trusting those instincts and understanding that story can be told in many different ways, and it's finding that way that that particular moment needs to be told. And I've had emails from people who were like, I took your workshop and I can't believe I wrote poetry. I never write poetry, which doesn't surprise me, because I think experimental writing and experimental thinking and approaches to creative writing can lead to poetry in a way that's sort of organic and really depends on the person. But it's almost though that freedom, if we take away the restrictions of saying, oh, you have to write something this way, poetry seems to come in. Like, poetry is this really actually liberating place and freed place that I think sometimes authors of other genres feel like sort of adverse to, but if you give people permission and freedom, then poetry sort of springs up as sort of a natural way to talk about things and express emotion and experience.
Thank you. And let's talk about your own poetry collection, the Exquisite Corpse. So how did it come about? Can you talk about the process,
totally. I
it's
have
about?
A little copy here. I can like
Great.
show it off. So
beautiful.
It's called This Exquisite Corpse. It's funny because I really fought the publisher on that cover for a really long time. The book is about sex. There's a lot of sex in the poetry collection, but I felt like, I was like, I don't know about this pomegranate, and like, it's so visceral and so sexual in nature. But then we had lots of conversations of like reference to Persephone in the pomegranate, and there is a lot of death in the collection as well. But yeah, so for anyone interested, I actually just did a reprinting. So I printed it with a small press that was run by a friend, and the press closed, sadly. And so because I read a lot of these poems as part of the cabaret that I run, I have had a lot of requests of people saying, where can I buy your book? So I finally just did a reprinting, which is great. It's nice to have more copies of it again. But yeah, so This Exquisite Corpse actually was my MFA dissertation, or is in large part my MFA dissertation. And I really didn't want to write poetry. So I went into my master's thinking, I'm going to write a collection of short stories. And I wrote 10 short stories that all sort of had this really abrasive interjecting narrator that instructed people to do particular physical things in the real world while reading the story. So I was really interested in the ways that like readership could become an interactive process, and the ways in which I might construct short story to like provide people as an experience beyond the page. But as I started writing these stories, these poems started to come in, and largely in part, my friend had overdosed from heroin. And it had been really that whole experience that had been part of the impetus of applying for my master's degree. And so basically her poems just would not let up. They were relentless. And I wrote about 7 poems that were all about her and the experience of losing her. And my supervisor was like, this is your book. Like, this is your collection. This is what your master's is meant to be about. She's, and really supported those short stories, but really said, we should write what is coming to us and what is strongest. And so I spent all the 2 years that I was doing my master's kind of putting the collection together. So it was an unexpected collection in some ways.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating how your collection came from an exploration of form in a way, because you started with these short stories that led to poetry later on, and also the interaction between that and the memoir form, because you also teach a course called experimental memoir. So in a way, you've been through that sort of exploration of form and also I guess, that line between life and fiction. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I often say I'm an accidental memoirist. Like, I was really scared of writing about myself and really didn't want to write about myself, and was really like very like adverse to that and wanted to avoid it, so much so that the first draft of the poetry collection, I only used a lowercase I, because I was so very nervous about the I of my story. And now all I write is memoir. And everything I do is memoir and is an exploration of self. And so the entire poetry collection is memoir. It could be called confessional poetry, it could be called memoir, it could be called poetry. I call it experimental poetry because all the forms on every page is different. No poem looks the same. But yeah, I really have moved through memoir in everything I've done now. So I've written a fictional novella that is really memoir. I've written a textbook that is memoir, and I'm working on a new piece that is memoir. So it's like, it's sort of hard to avoid it for me. But I had taken a poetry class a long time ago, and it was about performing poetry. And there was something really magical that the woman said. And she said, my voice is required to bring the poems into the room, but it's not about me. And so now that I've performed poetry so much, I really do understand that I've written this collection, this Exquisite Corpse. It is the I. It's about my experiences of grief, my experiences having sex, my experience doing drugs, but it's not really about me. It doesn't ever feel about me, actually. So I feel like sometimes halfway through a poem, I know I'm talking about myself, but when I look up at the audience, they're not thinking about me. It doesn't feel like they are. It feels like somehow an expression of I creates a space for anyone listening or reading to find their own expression, if that makes sense. So it's like memoir is a weird place for me, because it's like it all comes now from that wanting to share experience, but only so that others can maybe find their experience.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there can be a danger sometimes of like poetry being seen as solely personal narrative. You know, some people just expect that you're talking about yourself, and it can be a lot to bear, because even when you are talking about your personal experience, in the process of writing the poem, it becomes something more than just, you know, this is my experience. It's not a testimony, it's something else. When you describe the audience as seeing the poem or the text for itself, or maybe in relation to themselves, and not really as the author's whole person, I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel lucky too, because I just have had great audiences when I've performed. And of course, there are moments that people are really interested in the fact that it is my experience, and I get lots of follow-up questions, and I'm aware of that because I put raw, vulnerable stuff in my book. And I say a lot. Like, I basically reveal my entire sexual experience and history, and I reveal all the drugs I've ever done. And often people are coming up to me and saying, "Oh, you're so brave. Like, I can't believe you shared that." But more often than not, what people are coming up to me and telling me is a story. Like, they tell me a story about themselves. And it's, for me, that distinction that makes it really comfortable to be in the memoir and the I space, because most often it's not even connected to me. It's someone who comes and says, "Oh, I did this," and they take the I from me, if that makes sense. They sort of like embody the I, which is a really exciting thing to see happen. So
could you select a poem from your collection to read out to?
Yeah, I can. I was really struggling to think about what to read, because so I co-run with Gabriella Sloss, who is a playwright in Glasgow, and she's a sex positive playwright, and I am a sex positive poet. So we run a cabaret called Fucking Filthy Cabaret. So I'm so often reading a really explicit sexual work from this little book. Like, I'm that's what I perform. I perform it, you know, and we're about to start a monthly event here in Glasgow. So it's like, I read those poems all the time. So I decided I didn't want to read something explicitly sexual and I would read something else from the book, because it is a shame sometimes the book gets quite caught up in being a book that I think people don't realize has other elements to it. So what I wanted to read was actually a poem called For Gitana, which is one of the first poems I wrote for the collection, which is for my friend who overdosed from heroin. And it's interesting too, I just thought I would show that there is a piece of art in this book that a friend drew that is a photo of the two of us. So in talking about you asking about poetry and sort of working within different forms, there's actually photos throughout this book that she took. So there's a visual element as well. But yeah, okay. I haven't read it in a long time, so. For Jatana, Janice. Janis Joplin died in 1970. I saw a documentary one time. It might have been called Night Train or Midnight Train or Party Train. The Grateful Dead was on tour and Janis was there drinking whiskey and singing. When I am most sad about the death of my friend, I picture her there too. Animal. A lip that pouted out and away from the chin. Deep dark eyes, dreadlocks, then Franken dreads and bangs, then a bob. Was she like a cat or a dog? Sometimes a bird, other times a spider. Juice. We joked all the time about holding an intervention for her juice addiction. Cranberry, apple, orange, pomegranate, mango, pineapple. If it was in your fridge, she drank it. We never had the intervention about what we really needed to. I heard, why did she think moving to Portland would help her get clean? Heroin is everywhere down there. I could have helped her. Everyone knows people overdose. It was the only time I've ever wanted to punch someone in the face. Fantasy. That she is here. The hawk on the highway with its wings spread was her. The whisper of I am sorry and I love you was her. The crocus in the snowy ground was her. The ant that insisted on crawling on my leg was her. The song on the radio was her. The pull off the Southern Comfort bottle was her. The wind in a gust is her. Reprise. The Deception Pass Bridge, the ocean below and ashes in hand. All waters meet eventually. Saw the island, topless, walking into the Columbia and ashes in hand. All waters meet eventually. Sometimes I feel guilty about the blue vial that sits in my room with the ashes inside, but I cannot let go.
Thank you, that was beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to get to read it when I rarely get to. So
yeah, it's a beautiful poem. I love the rhythmic quality when you were saying this and this is her, this and this is her. It just becomes so, it fills up the space with that presence. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I mean, I really am excited about everything that I'm doing, and I really hope that anyone who's watching this, who's interested in what Beyond Form is doing, like I'm really an accessible person. So I know that you're going to include my social media information and my email as well, which is if you'd like to order a copy of the book, but also just that for me, making Beyond Form creative writing really feels like trying to create a cooperative and trying to create something that is really beyond myself. And I really want anyone interested to be able to be part of that. And that could be that they want to teach a workshop, or that they want to get involved, or they have ideas, or they have a workshop they'd like to see taught. So I really believe in like a very huge open door policy of like, this is not just for me, this is for all of us, and for any writer who sort of feels like a weirdo and misunderstood, or for people who are looking for an alternative to an academic education or a way to supplement an academic education. So really just get a hold of me. I'm super, super available and really always keen to hear from people who are interested in what we're doing. So.
Well, thank you for sharing all of this.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we should say that you're going to teach a workshop with us too.
Yeah,
I mean, we haven't confirmed everything yet, but I mean, I feel like that's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's true. I am going to teach a workshop in early April, right?
In early April, yep. Yeah. So people will have to look out for that. It's
coming soon. Yeah, go keep an eye on the website of Beyond Form to make sure you don't miss out.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as part of the Beyond Form family.
Yeah, thank you so much for that support.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Tawnya.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much to Tawnya again for the interview. Do have a look at the links posted in the video descriptions below. You can see Tawnya's social media and the website for Beyond Form Creative Writing with the program that is there. I highly recommend taking some of these classes if you want to experience writing in different genres and expand the possibilities of what you thought writing had to be, because we're often taught about fiction and poetry and non-fiction very separately. Beyond Form offers courses that enable you to combine these different forms together and try to explore new avenues for writing. Keep an eye out also for my collaboration with Beyond Form Creative Writing. If you want to save the date, it will be on the 23rd of April. That's a Saturday, but we haven't set the times yet and it's not advertised on the website so far. So stay tuned for that. You can also subscribe to my newsletter on my website if you want to be in touch and make sure you don't miss out on opportunities like this. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you again in another video very soon. Bye.